Mhm. Mhm. Anybody? All right. Hello. Can everybody hear me? Just give me a thumbs up. You good? Okay. I think I've got most of you. So we'll just go ahead and get started. I'm Dr. Hill. I think I've met most of you before. So hello, welcome back, and welcome if I have not met you. So this is corrections, and we are online for what I'm assuming will be all semester. I'm supposed to be online until Charleston moves into phase 3. Don't really know when that will be. So the way this class is going to work is basically we're just going to have Zoom lectures when we should have class time. So Canvas is going to be really important since it's an online class. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and we'll go through Canvas. Is anybody here not have access to Canvas? We all got it? Okay, very good. Okay, can we see my screen? Just give me a thumbs up if you can see it. All right, very good. All right, so Canvas is new for everybody. I have been working with it all summer, just getting ready for this class. And it seems really user-friendly, but of course, if you're having problems, just shoot me an email and I'll do my best to troubleshoot it. If not, I'll send you over to IT to help you. But this is our site right here. And almost everything can be found in the modules section right here. So we have our modules. The information that you need right here, you should probably read through this. That is my son screaming in the background. Sorry about that. So we've got important information right here. Anytime you have questions about the class, just make sure you pop over here and check. Of course, if you need to send me an email, I'm happy to answer that. But chances are the question that you have can be found right here. So here's my contact information right here. I have office hours. It says Tuesday and Thursday from 1 to 3, but since we're online, basically I'm available whenever. I'd rather not have a Zoom meeting with you at like 3 in the morning, so maybe we could keep that to a minimum. But I can meet with you on the weekends or after 5. Let's not do anything after 10 p.m. I get a little sleepy after that. But just shoot me an email and I can meet you almost whenever. We can do an emergency Zoom session. I just have to list office hours, but whenever works for you is probably fine with me. We have one required textbook. This is it right here. It's available in the bookstore. If you don't have it, get it. I don't care if you share it with other classmates as long as you're reading it. Occasionally there will be other required readings and I will post them online in the modules and give you a heads up when you need to do that. So the lectures, like I said, we will do Zoom lectures during our regular class time. I expect you to be here, cameras on, mics off. If you need to ask a question, you can just turn your mic on, or you can shoot a question through the comments. I had a couple of students raise their hand, like the little hand icon, or just raise their hand. Whatever you want to do is fine. But like I said, you can just turn your mic on and ask a question or make a comment if you want. So if you miss a Zoom lecture, they are all recorded. But in order for me to send it to you, I have to upload it to YouTube, and that takes forever, like 12 to 24 hours. And if you need a recorded lecture, you need a legitimate reason. Like, it can't be like, oops, I slept in, I'm not sending you the lecture in that case. So if you need a recorded lecture, there has to be a reason, and documentation is helpful with that as well. So all of the PowerPoints that correspond with the lectures are available in the modules for each week. I give them to you in advance. I recommend having them either printed out or downloaded so that you can take notes as they arise while I'm talking. The lectures are available to reduce the amount of writing and to sort of cue you in when you need to be taking notes. Just because the lectures are available doesn't mean you don't have to come to lecture. That's a super easy way to fail this class, so don't do that. So here we have important deadlines and the point breakdown. So you will have a quiz at the conclusion of each lecture, not each class. Usually a lecture takes 2 classes to get through. This first lecture we will finish during 1 lecture, but the quizzes are located within each module. So for instance, your first quiz will be from today's lecture and the corresponding reading, and that will be on Tuesday. We'll go through that. I'll go through the modules and show you about that as well. Each quiz is 5 points. It's 5 questions, 1 point per question, and the quizzes are available from 10:45 in the morning until 10:45 in the evening. So you have a 12-hour window to take that quiz. But again, we'll go over that a little bit more. Your midterm exam is worth 30% of your grade. It will be a combination of multiple choice and essay questions. Same with your final exam. That is also multiple choice and essay. And that will also be 30% of your grade. For both of your exams, I will provide a study guide. It's just a list of terms that you need to know. So I recommend that you fill out that study guide using your notes in the book. And if you want to schedule a meeting with me, I'll go over your study guide for you. So I won't do it if you just email it to me. You have to schedule a Zoom meeting. And then you email me your study guide and we'll go through it together. I'll help you find things that you can't find. I'll cross out anything that you don't need to worry about. If information is incorrect, I'll correct it. And usually if you do that, I'll give you a heads up or sort of a hint as to what the essay questions will be. The last assignment for this class is your policy brief, which is worth 30% of your grade. And throughout the semester, I've built in workshops. Usually when I teach this face-to-face, we all go to the computer lab together and we work together on this, but that's obviously not possible. So what we're gonna do instead is the week that we have policy briefs, you guys are each just gonna schedule a one-on-one Zoom meeting with me and we'll just work one-on-one. So I think that actually works a little bit better. That way we have a chance to work one-on-one, whereas if we do it all together in the computer lab, I can't get to everybody during the class period. So the weeks that we have policy brief workshops, we don't have Zoom lectures and you're just gonna schedule a one-on-one meeting with me. That will be written in the module. In the module the week before, I'm reminding you to schedule a meeting with me for the following week, okay? So you can schedule as many Zoom meetings with me as you'd like. I had a student last semester that wanted me to check on his policy brief once a week. You can ask me to check it twice a week. I will help you with that as much as you want. You can even have me, if you want to have me look at it before it's due, I'll grade it right in front of you and tell you what you need to fix before you submit it. So I'm here to help you, and the fact that we're online actually makes me more available to you than if I was strictly on campus. All right, so who here is not familiar with Respondus Lockdown Browser? Have we all, okay, Evan, Olivia, so not everybody has used it. Okay, so Respondus Lockdown Browser is a way to sort of prevent cheating, and we're gonna use it for our quizzes and our tests. So if you have not downloaded it yet, if you look in the syllabus, I have given you links right here to download this software. So this right here is a link to download the software. And here is a video about how to use it, but it's very user friendly. You download this software, and then for your quizzes, you open up the software on your computer. It takes you straight to Canvas, and you can navigate through it like you normally would to get to a quiz. All it does is it prevents you from looking at anything but that quiz. So you can't pull up a Google tab, or you can't pull up your lecture, like your PowerPoint. So basically it just locks your browser to prevent you from doing that, because literally nothing of mine is open book, okay? So none of the quizzes, none of the tests, none of that. So that's how you take the quizzes. For the exam, it's even creepier. So you have to use the lockdown browser, which makes it unable for you to pull up your PowerPoint or any other tab, but it also will turn your webcam on and record you while you're taking your exam, which honestly, it's creepier for me to watch that footage than it is for you to be filmed. So the way that works is it does like a facial detection software. And if you are constantly like looking down at your notes, or you get up and walk out, or somebody walks in, it also records your sound. So if you have somebody, like if you're like calling out questions and they're calling answers to you, I will hear all of that. And basically the monitor will flag you if you're doing anything shady, and it gives you a score at the end of your exam. If you're flagged red, that means you're likely cheating, and I can watch the footage, and it will even tell me at what minute marker it looks like you're doing something shady. I can skip to that to see what's happening. So if it appears that you're cheating, I'm just going to give you a 0, and then we'll go from there. So just don't do that. So that comes with, the software comes with that's download that we're talking about. So you just have to have your webcam turned on when you take your midterm and your final exam. But for the weekly quizzes, you don't need the webcam. They're just 5-point quizzes, and collectively they're only worth 10% of your grade. Questions about that?
I had a problem with, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was looking at the syllabus for that, and I tried to download it, but I have a Chromebook, and so it was not letting me download that. Sorry?
What's a Chromebook?
A Chromebook. It's a type of computer.
Okay.
That's my type of computer.
Can you ask IT about that?
That's what I was going to go do. I was going to go see if I could do that today, just so, because I
Yeah.
have that to do for other classes too, and so I need to figure that out.
Yeah, I would ask IT about that. They might have you contact Respondus directly, but we'll figure something out. Any other questions about the creepy software? Okay. All right, so let's go back to the module. All right, so let's take a look at what we're doing week by week. So here is module 1. So this, you'll see each module lists the dates that we're talking about right here, as well as the corresponding subject and lecture name. So this week right here, if you click on overview, I don't know why the -2 is there. My OCD nature, it's driving me crazy. I have tried so many times to get rid of it. It won't go away, so ignore it. So here is the lecture that we'll be going over right here. It's the PowerPoint. I recommend you have it pulled up when we start the lecture today. Here's the Zoom link right here. And to do for the week, I'm telling you that this is the lecture we need to do. And you have chapter 1 to read in your book right here. So pages 3 through 19. So the following week, so next week, what we're doing is we are going over lecture 2, which is right here. We've got the Zoom link for the class on Tuesday. And on Tuesday, we take our first quiz. So those of you that have had me as a professor before know that we play Jeopardy during our quizzes. So the way that works is I just start at the top of the alphabet, and the first 3 people are going to be the first 3 Jeopardy champions. So before we leave today, I'll let you know. So the way this works when we're online is the 3 people that are playing Jeopardy are the only ones that do not take the online quiz, okay? So what they're going to do, everybody's going to take their online quiz, and then the 3 people that are playing Jeopardy, the following class will take the quiz live in front of everybody. So I'm going to bring the questions up one at a time. You guys will turn your mics on, just the 3 people playing. And if you play Jeopardy, you automatically get a 5 out of 5. And if you win, you keep coming back, and the last 3 standing get extra credit on the final exam. This way, you guys, because normally when we play this face-to-face, I have you guys grade your own quizzes while they're playing, but we obviously can't do that here. But this way, you'll get to see what the answers are to those quiz questions. So the next module you'll see right here is the quiz that you need to take on Tuesday. So you'll see right here that it's not available just yet. I think this looks slightly different for you guys because this is the professor view. But what you'll have to do is open up Respondus Lockdown browser on your computer. It takes you straight to Canvas, and then you would go through like this. Okay? If you have problems, like if your computer freezes or dies or something happens and you get kicked out of the quiz, just shoot me an email and I'll make it available for you again, okay? So if you're having technical problems, just let me know, and we'll find a way around these problems. You're not going to be penalized for having technological issues in the class, okay? All right, so your first quiz is on Tuesday, and you have between 10:45 in the morning until 10:45 in the evening to take it. Maybe don't start it at like 10:44. That way, if you're having problems, we have some time to fix it, okay? Questions? No questions?
So quiz 1 is due next class period?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Well, after class. The
After
earliest
class,
you can
yes,
take it is 10:45 in the morning. That way, the students that are taking this class before you can take the quiz and then tell you what's on the quiz. I mean, I guess they could just do it after they do it. Just don't cheat. Don't be little cheaters. Yes, so next Tuesday. Other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
So, does that replace class on Tuesday and Thursday?
What now?
Does the quiz replace attending class on Tuesday?
Oh, no. Oh, no,
So
no.
you go to class and then take the quiz later?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, normally we would take the quiz during class, but I don't know how to do that online. So we're just you got 12 hours after class to take the quiz.
Okay.
It's a 5-point quiz. It should take you maybe 3 minutes to take it. So no, that's not going to replace an hour and 15-minute class.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? All right, if we have no more questions, let's start the lecture. So we are going to go through our first lecture today. And what we will be talking about is crime trends and how correctional policy has been affected by these crime trends. So if you guys don't already have the lecture pulled up, go ahead and download it from the module and we will begin. All right, give me a thumbs up if you can see the lecture. You can all see it? Very good. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is take a look at some of the crime trends that we've seen over the past several decades. So it can be split into 3 periods, basically. So the early period starts around 1946. Even though our first crime surveys were in the 1920s, we don't have really accurate records until about the mid-40s. So that's where most charts will start, or graphs will start. So this actually only starts in 1957, but if you can imagine, it kind of just was stable right around here, the 10 years preceding that. So between 1946 and about 1960, which is about here, we had pretty stable low crime rates. But then in the 1960s is when we see this rapid acceleration. So that's what we refer to as the middle period right here. So the middle period is from about 1961 to about 1973, and that's when the crime rates really started to accelerate. The period that we're in now is what we refer to as the late period, and that's from about 1974 to present day. And we have pretty stable high crime rates. So even though we see a little bit of flip-flopping here, if you look at it in comparison to what we had before, that's really high. And recently we've started to see a slow decline with our crime rates. So one of the misconceptions that I get a lot of times is that students have heard from television that crime is at an all-time high or that crime is rising. That is not true. Our crime rates are higher than they were in the 40s, but in general, since the 90s, we have started to see a decline in our crime rates. So even though through this late period, we would classify this as stable high crime rates, that doesn't mean that crime is currently rising. So this ends in 2005. So if we take a look at what's happened in the last 10 years or so, from about 2006 to 2016, we've started to see this like slow decline. Another misconception that I hear from students a lot is that violent crime is more prevalent than property crime, and that's absolutely not true. Violent crime right here is the blue line right here, and property crime is the red line up here. Property crime is a lot more common than violent crime. So the other thing that you'll see is a lot of crime stats are 3 and 4 and 5 years delayed. It takes a really long time to compile these stats and to make sure they're all accurate. So right now, the preliminary stats, the latest stats that we have that we still consider preliminary are around 2017, 2018, but the fully finished stats that we know are from about 2016. They're putting the final touches on 2017 right now. So it takes a really long time to get all that done correctly. So the last crime chart we're going to look at is from about 1997 till present. The reason I want to show you this one is because the last thing we're going to talk about today is something we refer to as the Great American Crime Decline. And crime decreased hugely in the 90s. And you can see right here, this big dip right here, that's the 1990s. It decreased so much that there are multiple books that were written about it, and we refer to it as the Great American Crime Decline. But the reason I want to show you this is that it's only gone down since then. So even since the 90s, our crime rate has still been going down. And we see a much larger decrease among the property than the violent. All right, so now that you kind of have a sense for what our crime rates look like, I want to talk about what sentencing strategies look like in relation to those crime trends. So from about 1900 to 1970, so basically what we're talking about is this early period and middle period, we had the same sentencing strategy, and it didn't change until the late period. So let's talk about the way that we sentenced offenders during that period. So this is what we refer to as the rehabilitative ideal, and our sentencing strategy was referred to as indeterminate sentencing. So indeterminate, that word means undetermined, unknown, right? And the reason it's called indeterminate sentencing, there's a couple of reasons why that is. So the first one is when we're talking about a specific crime, when we're letting a judge determine how long you're going to be sentenced for, the legislator would set a broad minimum and maximum, right? So judges had a lot of discretion about what specific sentence to give to one person that was convicted of a crime, right? So just as an abstract example, say we're talking about first-degree burglary. Under the indeterminate sentencing scheme, the legislator would say a judge could sentence you from anything as low as 2 years on probation to 10 years in prison. So the judge had a huge range to choose from. And the point here was individualized treatment. So they were trying to look at you as a person and determine what would best rehabilitate you, which is why we refer to this period of sentencing as the rehabilitative ideal. So if you're somebody that this is your 5th time being convicted of first-degree burglary, they might give you the maximum. Whereas if this is your first offense, they might give you the minimum, right? So the reason the judges had this wide discretion was because they were supposed to look at you as a person and determine what would work best for you. It was supposed to be individualized. So the first reason it was indeterminate is that when you walked into that sentencing hearing, you didn't really know what you were going to get. The next reason it was indeterminate is because the judge would sentence you to a range, right? So they had this wide range to choose from. They would sentence you for like 3 to 5 years. So if you've ever heard a judge say, I'm sentencing you to no less than 3 years and no more than 5 years, that is an indeterminate sentence, because what they're trying to do is say, I'm putting you away for 3 to 5, and then I'm going to let a parole board determine when you've been rehabilitated enough to be released from prison. So first it was indeterminate because you didn't know what sentence you were going to get when you walked into that sentencing hearing. The second reason it was indeterminate is that you didn't really know when you were going to be released, right? So if you're being sentenced to 3 to 5 years, what that means is you go away to prison. When you hit your 3rd year in prison, you go in front of the parole board, and the parole board is going to look at your behavior while you were incarcerated. If you spent that time stabbing up people, they're probably going to deny you your parole, right? And you'll come back for the 4th year. And if you continuously stabbed people, you'll come back, they'll max you out, and you will be released at that 5th year. If you go up in front of parole and they look at your record in prison and you've gotten a GED, you've participated in a drug rehabilitation program, you've had no stabbings, what they're going to say is, I'm going to release you from prison, and you will spend the rest of that, the 2-year period, that 3 to 5, you'll spend the 2 years in the community on parole, and a parole officer will watch your behavior, right? So that's the second reason it was indeterminate, is that when you went away, you didn't know when you'd be released. It was up to the parole board to determine when you've been rehabilitated enough to be released, and you'll serve the rest of your sentence in the community. So that's what indeterminate sentencing means, is the legislator sets these wide minimum and maximums. The judge has broad discretion. They sentence you for a range of time, and it's up to the parole board to determine when you've been rehabilitated enough to be released from prison. That is indeterminate sentencing, and that is what our nation did up until about the 1970s. And that is when everything changed. So from 1970 to about 2000 is when we switched over to what we refer to as the justice model. But let's talk about a little bit of a historical context. What led up to this massive switch in the way that we sentence offenders? So we already know, when we look at our little handy dandy chart right here, we can see that the crime rate massively increased, right? From about the 60s to the 70s, right? So keep that in mind. That's what people are thinking about. There was a lot of social unrest during that period. Crime rates were skyrocketing. This is when the Attica riot happens, 1971. 1974, we saw the Kansas City Preventative Patrol. Who knows what happened in that experiment? Anybody? Oh, Roger?
They like increase patrols in certain areas and like decrease them in other areas, just to see like if you increase your patrol, if the crime rate would like go down, but it ended up going up.
What happened?
It didn't work.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly.
No, you're very close. So basically they had 3 police beats that were very similar in Kansas City. One, like Roger said, they doubled patrol. In another police beat, they left patrol the same. And in the 3rd beat, they took it away completely. So there was not a cop car unless you called a police officer into that area. And they looked at the crime rates for a year, and nothing changed. Not only did the crime rate not have any movement whatsoever, but also citizens' fear of crime didn't change at all. Most citizens didn't even realize when there was double the amount of patrol or no patrol in their area. So basically what we're seeing here is it looks like the criminal justice system cannot control the crime rates, right? And that perhaps we're coddling criminals with our rehabilitative ideal. The last thing that happened that really pushed us away from indeterminate sentencing was a publication in 1974. A researcher named Martinson published a study called What Works. Let me tell you a little story about this man. So Martinson and about 3 other researchers were doing a really big research project, and it was a twofold research project. The first one was to see which correctional treatment program, so what prison program works to stop crime completely, right? So is there one correctional treatment program that will reduce recidivism for all offenders, right? That was step one. Well, everybody's a little bit different and everybody commits crimes for different reasons. So they couldn't find one program that worked for everybody, right? And so the next step was to figure out, okay, well, if there's not one program that stops crime for everybody, what programs work best with which types of offenders, right? So if you are undereducated, does getting a GED in prison reduce your likelihood of coming back to prison? If you're addicted to drugs, does drug treatment work best for you? If you were, does cognitive behavioral programming work better, right? So they were looking at the different types. So, but before they could even start that second part, Martinson took the results from the first part and published them completely by himself. So he published the first part of this experiment under a study called What Works, which quickly became dubbed Nothing Works. Because what he was saying is not one prison-based rehabilitation program works to reduce recidivism for all offenders. So if you think about this context, crime rates are rising, Attica riot happened, Kansas City Preventative Patrol says increasing patrol doesn't reduce crime, and now we're saying no correctional rehabilitation program works. That is why they wanted to make a switch away from the way that they were sentencing offenders. Another concern that we saw with the indeterminate sentencing scheme is that a lot of times it looked like it was racially biased. So the minorities were getting harsher sentences than the Caucasian offenders. When you give the judges that much discretion, some people were calling it racially biased. I want that one, please. Thank you. So for all those reasons combined, they did away with the indeterminate sentencing scheme and they brought in something that we would refer to as the justice model. So the justice model was saying, we don't need these wide minimum and maximums, right? That we need to have one crime or one punishment for one crime. We shouldn't have one offender that's convicted of first-degree burglary getting 3 years of probation and another offender convicted of the same offense getting 10 years in prison, right? They said, let's do away with that. So that was the first thing that the justice model did. So they're saying that your sentencing should only be based on the crime that you were convicted of and your past history of criminal activity. So they're going to eliminate this individualized treatment and the discretion that the judges had. So let's talk about the specific policies of the justice model. So like I said, a specific crime is going to carry a clearly identifiable sentence, not this broad minimum and maximum, right? So it doesn't matter who you are. If you are convicted of first-degree burglary, you get 5 years in prison, right? So they took away the judge's discretion. So instead of having the legislator come up with these broad minimum and maximums, they had sentencing guidelines. The next really big policy of the justice model is they did away with parole. Why wouldn't they need parole under the justice model? Stephen?
The reason why they didn't need parole is because everyone, say you committed a crime, it wasn't as flexible for your punishment, and therefore you'd spend a certain amount of time and then be released.
Exactly. We don't need parole anymore if we're not giving a broad minimum and maximum, right? So if we're not saying you're being sentenced 3 to 5, we're saying you're being sentenced to 5, we don't need a parole board. We let you out in 5. Does that make sense? So a lot of states abolished parole during the justice model period. So the justice model is the name of this sentencing strategy, but the actual law that a lot of the states passed was called Truth in Sentencing. So this may sound familiar to you. It's also known, excuse me, it's also known as the 85% law. So the problem with abolishing parole completely means that it doesn't give you any incentive to behave yourself while you're incarcerated, right? If you know you're in there for 5 years, regardless of your behavior, why would you behave, right? Why would you participate in your own rehabilitation? So the states wanted to give people a little bit of an incentive to behave. So they passed laws called Truth in Sentencing 85%, which means you have to serve at least 85% of your sentence. You can shave off that last 15% by behaving. And different states passed different ways to shave that off, and different correctional facilities implemented them. They were called either good time or gain time. And it would do something like, if you get your GED, we'll shave 60 days off your sentence. If you go 2 years without stabbing anybody or having a violent disciplinary infraction, we'll shave another 60 days off. So that good time and gain time can shave off the last 15% of your sentence, but you have to serve at least 85%, right? You can't shave off more than that 15%. So in that way, we don't need parole, and we're also making sure that these offenders are serving a good chunk of their sentence, but at the same time, we're giving them an incentive to behave themselves. So the last policy of the justice model was the implementation of intermediate sanctions. So this is when we started to see things like boot camps, electronic monitoring, house arrest, intensive supervision probation. So if you are too bad for regular probation but not quite bad enough for prison, we'll put you on intensive supervision probation, which means you just have more conditions to follow, and we're going to watch you more closely. So as you could probably tell, this is part of the Get Tough on Crime movement right here. So let's talk about what the justice model did to our prison population and where we are today. So we are in an era that we refer to as new penology, and it's not really a sentencing strategy as much as a strategy about how to deal with the large number of incarcerated people that we have in our nation. So this is what the justice model did to our prison population. So the blue is the male, the green is the female. Males always commit more crimes than females, as you can see. The red is the average. So this is our incarceration rate. Thank you. So you can see right here, this is when the justice model happened right here, and look at the huge skyrocketing of our prison population. So in this, this graph ends in 2016, and 2006, and this is from 2000 to about 2016. So you can see it's slightly declined since then, not a whole lot, but slightly. And these lines are different. This is federal, state, and local jails right here. So even though the colors are the same, they don't mean the same thing on each chart, because otherwise it looks like the females are committing more crimes. That's never the case. So we can see state prisoners up here, local jails right here, and federal prisoners right here. So you can see they've declined ever so slightly. We reached a peak around 2008, and our prison population has been declining by about 1 to 1.5 percentage points a year. So basically the justice model hugely increased our prison population, because when we take away that wide discretion that the judges have, that means people are more likely to receive prison time, right? And then when we take away parole, they're likely to spend more time in prison. So more likely to be sent to prison and more likely to spend time in prison. This is what we get right here. This is when we started to see mass incarceration happening. So because of that, we are now in an era that we refer to as new penology, which again, it's not really a sentencing strategy. It's just, how do we deal with this large number of people that we now have incarcerated? So because of this, we have the justice model means during new penology, we have an increased reliance on imprisonment and concerns for surveillance and custody. What I mean by that is there are so many people in prison. We are very concerned with watching all of them and having the proper custody levels. So your custody level, whenever you go to prison, you meet with an intake officer, and they're going to ask you a series of questions about yourself, and then they're going to have a statistical algorithm that spits out your custody level. So every prison system is slightly different. They differ by states, but in general, your options are minimum custody, medium custody, and maximum custody. And I'm not talking about minimum, medium, and maximum prisons. I'm talking about your surveillance level, your custody level in a particular institution. So if you're minimum custody, that means that you have more freedom. Medium, a little less freedom. Maximum, you're probably in solitary confinement. So the prisoners that I often interview, and that's my area of expertise, is prison programs. So I'm in prison all the time talking to inmates. Most of the time I'm talking to inmates in minimum and medium custody, because the ones that are in maximum custody don't have the freedom to participate in programs. When I went to Wateree Correctional Facility, which is in the middle of nowhere in this state, they have a farm that is actually outside the prison gates. And so they have a fourth custody. So in order to work on the farm, you have to be minimum out, which means you actually leave the prison gates every morning to go work on the farm. So I was talking to the guys that were working in the dairy farm and the thoroughbred retirement program that they have there. And every morning those guys walk out of the gates of prison, get on a four-wheeler and drive to the farm. So that's another custody level that they have. So you have to be a really good prisoner if you're going to have minimum out custody. So the specific policies of new penology is basically we're going to use statistics to predict who's likely to behave themselves, right? Because there are so many prisoners that we can't individually take the time to get to know you. We're going to spend 15, 20 minutes with an intake officer that's asking you rapid fire questions. They're putting the information in the computer and it spits out what your predictive level of behavior is, right? So they're looking for risk factors. So things like multiple incarcerations, multiple violent disciplinary infractions while they're incarcerated, escape attempts, drug addiction. All of those things are risk factors. The more risk factors you have, the more likely you are to get maximum or medium custody. Or they're looking for protective factors, like this is your first time in prison, you are highly educated, you don't have any violent tendencies. Things like that are protective factors. The more protective factors you have, the more likely you are to get minimum or minimum out custody. Because our main goal here is just efficiently controlling the violence in our prison, right? We know that there's going to be a lot of violent people in prison, and there are just so many of them that we don't have the time to individually get to know you. So we're going to use statistics to predict who's likely to stab someone else and put them in maximum security, right? So another policy of new penology is more cost-efficient forms of custody. So we have about 1.5 million prisoners that are incarcerated today. About 2.5 million of them are under supervision. So that includes people that are on probation and parole or any sort of intermediate sanction. Who remembers from my previous classes or from other knowledge, who knows how much it costs to incarcerate one prisoner per year? Stephen?
About roughly 100 to 800,000.
That's pretty high. That is what it costs to put somebody in civil commitment, which we'll talk, that's like a hardcore sex offender. We're going to talk about them later in the semester. But on average, it costs about 40,000 to 60,000 per prisoner per year. So when we have 1.5 million prisoners, that is a lot of money we are spending on incarcerating somebody. So the states are trying to figure out ways to do this in a more cost-effective way. So what they will often do is try to use statistical programs to do selective incapacitation and predict the worst of the worst. So the worst of the worst, we need to spend that $60,000 a year on them, right? Somebody that is unlikely to cause mayhem, what we might do is just have them on house arrest and give them an electronic ankle monitor. An ankle monitor, if you're on intensive supervision probation, meaning you're checking in with your probation officer like 3 times a week and we're restricting your movements with an ankle monitor, that costs about $1,400 a year per prisoner or per person. So $1,400 versus $60,000, that's where they're trying to save some money, and they're trying to use statistics to predict who's unlikely to go on like a murder spree if we leave them in the community on electronic monitoring. So if we're trying to just selectively incapacitate because we have too many people incarcerated, we're putting a lot more people on intermediate sanctions. So if you look at the number of people that are on intermediate sanctions, you see kind of the same spike that we saw with the prison inmates, right? So now we're seeing another policy of new penology is that we're focusing on surveillance and control with the intermediate sanctions, and we're often seeing drugs as a way to do that. So let me give you an example. So the average probation officer has about 70 offenders that they are responsible for watching at any point in time. That is a lot of people to keep track of, right? So they just don't have enough hours in the day to be able to individually talk to or go visit this person at their work or their house and make sure that they don't have like a pile of cocaine on their coffee table, or that they're dealing drugs, or that they're committing all kinds of robberies, right? So often what they'll do is they will say, regardless of who you are or why you were given this sentence, you have to take a drug test at least once a month, right? So for them, that's a really easy and effective way to make sure that this person is doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? They say at the first of every month, you got to go to Quest Diagnostics and take your drug test. Quest will then email your probation officer what your results are, right? So that seems like a quick way to keep track of these people, right? But if you think about it, why are we giving drug tests to somebody that wasn't convicted of a drug offense, right? That doesn't seem like it makes a whole lot of sense. So we're seeing this sort of different relationship between drugs and punishment. And that's what I mean about an intermediate sanction focusing on surveillance and control, is that we are just trying to find a way to watch you more efficiently because there are too many. We can't check up with you by stopping by your house or calling your boss or, whatever. So really the theme of new penology is efficiency through the use of statistics, because there are just too many prisoners. There are just too many prisoners. We have 1.5 million prisoners in our nation. And if we include the people on intermediate sanctions, that's 2.5 million. Questions about these policies? All right, let's talk about the Great American Crime Decline. So this is something that criminologists love to talk about, just because it was so unexpected. We didn't expect to see this happening because the crime rates rose so rapidly during the 60s in the period of civil unrest. They continued to do so in the 70s. There was still civil unrest in that period. And then during the 80s, during the crack epidemic, like everybody just thought that crime was going to continue to skyrocket. And then in the 90s, it just started dropping off. And you can see right here, this is 1993 to 2011. And if you look in retrospect, this is the 90s right here. So this is just something that we didn't expect. So criminologists are pretty obsessed with this. So you don't need to write down these numbers. I just want to explain or just give you an understanding of how much the crime declined. So during the 90s, homicide decreased by 39%. Robbery decreased by 44%. Rape decreased by 41%. Aggravated assault, 24%. Burglary, 41%. Auto theft, 37%. Larceny, 23%. We don't ever see these numbers. I mean, usually crime fluctuates, maybe if it's like a crazy year, like 3 percentage points from one year to another. So this is very dramatic. And like I said, we really didn't expect this given what was happening in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. So this really came out of nowhere, and you can see how dramatic this was. So those numbers that I just gave you, those are UCR stats. So who remembers where we get UCR stats? Where do those numbers come from? Come on.
They come from individual reports from precincts around the nation.
Thank you, Colton. Yes, they are reported crimes to the police, right? So who are we leaving out if we're only looking at reported crimes? Stephen?
The dark figure of crime, which is the unreported crimes.
Very good. And we get those from our victim surveys. So BJS stands for the Bureau of Justice Statistics. That is who collects the dark figure of crime, the National Crime Victimization Surveys. So anytime you want to see if a crime trend is actually happening, you need to look at the UCR stats and the victim surveys. Because if they don't trend the same, they're telling a different story, right? So if UCR is showing a decline in crime, but the victim surveys aren't, that just means that less people are reporting crime. It doesn't mean that crime is actually going down. So you want to see those two surveys trending together in order to determine if it's actually a crime decline. So when you compare the UCR stats to the victim surveys, you see that in fact it's a trend, right? So let's talk about what caused it. So let's first, again, we always want to look at the historical context before we jump onto a single policy, right? So Martinson's Nothing Works, his article saying that no criminology program seems, or no prison-based program works. The Kansas City experiment, the Attica riot, all those crime rates kind of created an overreaction, right? So we switched from the indeterminate sentencing scheme to the justice model. And now in retrospect, we see that that was a bit of an overreaction. So then what we have when we start to see the crime declines coming out in the 90s, the race was on to figure out what exactly caused it. And so we have what we refer to as the favorite son narrative of crime decline. So in New York City, Chief of Police William Bratton was saying it was his broken windows theory that was declining the crime rates. In California, they were saying their tough sentencing laws, the 3 strikes and you're out. But this is why we call it the favorite son narrative. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense that the sentencing laws in California are going to have a nationwide crime decline, or the policies in one city, New York City, are going to cause a crime decline for our entire nation. So when everybody was clamoring, trying to say, no, it was us, it was my policy that decreased the crime rates, that's what we refer to as the favorite son narrative. And what they are also falling prey to is what we refer to as the euphoric fallacy, which is the temptation to assume that crime declines are caused by policy. So again, the euphoric fallacy is the temptation to assume that crime declines or crime rates in general are caused by policy. And that's exactly what we saw up here with the favorite son narrative, that everybody was saying it was my policy that decreased these crime rates. But you have to remember, and if anybody has spent any period of time talking to criminals, they all have their own history. People commit crimes for a variety of reasons, right? Crime is a social problem. It rarely is affected by one criminal justice policy, right? And that's why we refer to it as the euphoric fallacy. We will pass a sentencing scheme, or we'll pass a law and then scratch our heads wondering why it didn't affect the crime rate. It's because crime is a social problem, and there are so many things that go into the crime rate that it's hard for one policy to affect this social problem. So let's talk about what did cause the Great American Crime Decline. Now, I broke it down into 3 Keep in mind there are about 25 other reasons that you don't need to know about unless you're getting a PhD in this subject. But I'm going to give you the top 3, and even with these top 3, I'm skimming over a lot of the details, okay? So the first thing that affected our crime rates was incapacitation. So basically, we saw that huge increase in incarceration during the 70s and the 80s, right? That when we switched to the justice model. So the first thing to note about that is that it was incapacitation that affected the crime rate, not deterrence. So what does deterrence theory say? Deterrence theory. I know you guys know what that is. Who's taking criminology?
Punish them bad enough and they really won't want to do crime.
Exactly, right? So you see that our nation is cracking down and you say, okay, I'm not going to commit crimes anymore, right? That is deterrence theory. And that is not what is affecting the crime rate here. I'm sure if you took, honestly, it doesn't matter who you took criminology with. Criminologists basically consider deterrence theory to be dead because it really is not effective. And we're actually going to talk about deterrence theory and why it doesn't work. And I believe the 3rd week of class. So when we're talking about the incarceration policies, I'm only talking about incapacitation. And what I mean is that we are taking a huge chunk of the population and locking them away to where they cannot commit crimes. It's not that the rest of us saw that they got locked away and we're like, oh, we better not commit any crimes. That's not what it was. It's that we just took a chunk of you and said, okay, that's it. You're going to be locked in this prison and you can't commit any more crimes. So that definitely had an effect. How large of an effect is debatable, and I'll never forget, I think it was like my 2nd year that I went to the annual criminal justice conference. I think we were in San Francisco, and I was like a 2nd year master's student, and I saw 2 grown adults almost come to blows over their particular statistical model. One of them predicted how large of an effect incapacitation had, and the other one had conflicting findings. And they got into a huge argument in front of a room full of people, and I thought they were going to punch each other. So how large of an effect incapacitation had on the crime rate is debatable, but we know it's not 100%. Because if you think about it, the crime rate or the incarceration started rising in the 70s and the 80s, that if it was all incapacitation, we would have seen a crime decline sooner. So we know it's not just the incarceration policies. Not only that, but we saw the homicide rate cycle up and down during that same period. So it had an effect, but it wasn't the sole effect. And that's what I mean with the euphoric fallacy. Not one policy is going to affect a social problem like crime. So the next thing that criminologists point to is demographics. It's kind of this dark horse. Steven, is your mic on? Steven.
What's the recycling bin or trash bin?
Thank you. So the dark horse was kind of this, and it's hard to see this as it's happening. We didn't know until retrospectively how much of an effect the demographics of our population had on the crime rate. So who knows what the age crime curve is? What does that say? Steven? Okay, now you have to turn your mic on.
Sorry. The age crime thing is when someone is more than likely to age out of the phase of life when they're going to commit a crime.
Okay, so when does somebody at what age are they likely to age into crime?
The teenage years.
Right. So 15 is the average. When are they likely to age out of crime?
Between 30 and 40.
Close, about 25. All right, let's remember to pop that mic off.
Sorry.
There we go. Okay. So the age crime curve says, on average, if you're going to commit a crime, you're going to start doing it around the age of 15, and you're going to be done with it around the age of 25. There's a lot of reasons why that is. Mainly when you age out of crime, it has a lot to do with brain development. Like your prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed till you're about 25. And there's all kinds of hormonal changes that are happening when you're 15. If you're interested in that, I recommend taking some psych classes about that. But basically what we see is, on average, most people will start committing crimes around 15 and peak in their early 20s, and then stop committing crime around the age of 25. Now, given that's an average, and I actually had a student in the last class ask me a really great question, and he was saying, well, what about white collar criminals? And that's true. Generally, their age crime curve looks a lot different than the average, but that's what it is. The age crime curve is the average. And if you look at individual types of crimes, you see different age crime curves, but when you put them all together, most people on average will start committing crimes around 15 and age out around 25. So James Q. Wilson had a theory that we refer to as the baby boomer theory. And what he's saying here is the baby boomers, who were the people that were born in the 10 years or so after World War II, most of them were aging into crime when the crime rates were rising during the 60s and the 70s, and they were aging out of crime when crime was declining in the 90s, right? So just this population of people, and the baby boomers were a huge group of people, just the fact that they existed in that time period hugely affected the crime rate. And this is something that we didn't see when it was happening. We had to look at this retrospectively later. So demographics, this whole idea of demographics, there's a lot more that goes into it. The baby boomers is a big theory. There's all kinds of other theories that sort of fall under the heading of demographics. Another very controversial one is abortion. So Roe versus Wade, which happened in 1973, had those children been born, they would have been aging into crime around the 90s. So it's just a lot of things about demographics that we don't see as it's happening, right? And this is why we always talk about the euphoric fallacy, is because we want to assume that crime declines are caused by policy, when a lot of times it's something as small as demographics, right? So that's what I mean, that crime is a social problem. It has to do with social factors, and this is a big one of them right here. So the last thing that affected the crime rate hugely was the economy. So during the 90s, unemployment was at an all-time low and wages were really high. So there is a huge link between unemployment and crime. A lot of these studies were published in the late 80s by a man named Ted Chiricos. He's actually a former professor of mine. He's a beloved little curmudgeon, but he is a brilliant man. And he published a lot of stuff. Chiricos and Waldo, who's another one of my professors, he's really sweet. Chiricos is not sweet. They published a lot of studies about the effect of unemployment on crime, and there's a big link. So what we're seeing here is that if you are likely to start committing crimes because you can't find a job, or committing crimes to supplement your income, you're less likely to do it during the 90s. So the incapacitation effects that the justice model had, the demographics with the baby boomers aging out of crime, and the low unemployment and high wages during the 90s had maximal effect to decrease crime during the 90s. So the point of this is that crime really is a social problem, and that people choose to engage in criminal activity for a myriad of reasons. And sometimes factors outside of the criminal justice policy affect the crime rate more than we know. So demographics in the economy didn't have anything to do with that criminal justice policy. So the switch to the justice model did affect it a little bit, but a lot of times it has stuff to do with just the social environment that is not controlled by criminal justice policy. So it's important to remember that moving forward, because a lot of the things that we're going to do in this class are to look at programs that aim to reduce recidivism or increased assistance. So recidivism means you're committing another crime after you've been punished. Assistance means you're stopping crime, right? So we're going to be looking at programs and policies that are aiming to increase assistance or reduce recidivism. So it's important to remember, if you see seemingly perfect policies or programs not working really, really well, it's because there are often things going on behind the scenes that we can't tell. All right, questions about the lecture? Okay, now what we're gonna do is see who's gonna be playing Jeopardy first. So let's take a peek here. All right, Danielle Beck. All right, you're playing Jeopardy. Joseph Servi, did I say that right? Where's Joseph? Oh,
That's right, ma'am.
Servi?
That's right.
Okay, and Thomas Chapman. Where's Thomas? All right, Thomas. So Danielle, Joseph, and Thomas. I got to do the math. We might be doing 4 people at once, but for now, we'll just start with 3. So Danielle, Joseph, and Thomas, on Tuesday, do not take the quiz, okay? Everybody else, take your quiz online. Joseph, Thomas, Danielle, do not take it, okay? And then first thing on Thursday morning, what I'm gonna do is pull up the quiz 1 question at a time, and you 3 are gonna answer it as we go. You'll automatically get a 5 out of 5 for playing, and the winner will come back. Okay, unfortunately, you 3 are students that I have not had before, so you're unfamiliar with the Jeopardy process, but I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You just answer if you know the answer, right? And sometimes there's more than one answer to the question, so I'll open it up to the floor and you can throw out the answer that you gave on the quiz, and I'll let you know if that was right. That way you can sort of get some feedback on your quiz, so that you know besides just the grade that you get. And a lot of these questions are very similar to the types of questions that you will get on the midterm and the final exam. Questions about that? All right. Oh,
I have
yeah.
a question.
Yeah.
So we are taking the quiz on Thursday, but not Tuesday, correct?
What?
The Tuesday quiz we're not taking, but there's another one on Thursday. There is.
Yes, you will be taking that one, right?
Got
And so the next 3 people, so Ryan, I saw Ryan in here. Oh, there's Ryan, Deb, and maybe Madeline, she's pending. I think she's the note taker. Okay, Joshua Gambrell. So you 3 won't take the quiz on Thursday, but Joseph, Danielle, and Thomas will take the second quiz then. Does that make sense? All you need to know, Danielle, Joseph, and Thomas, do not take that online quiz on Tuesday. Okay? Everybody else, take it. And it's not even available until 10:45. So after our lecture on Tuesday, I'll remind everybody to take it. Okay? All right. Also, if you have not downloaded Respondus Lockdown Browser, let's go ahead and do that. If you're having trouble downloading it, contact IT. They may tell you to contact Respondus, but we'll get it figured out. But let's do it sooner rather than later. Does anybody have any other questions for me? All right, sounds good. If you have questions, shoot me an email. If you need clarification on anything we went over today, or you need an emergency Zoom session, anything like that, just shoot me an email and I'm happy to set it up for you, okay? All right, see you guys on Tuesday.